Hi, Zandy. Years ago, I sat across the table with a friend who he's thinking about going into the speaking business, and he's a naturally charismatic guy with a genuine passion for helping people. So I was quite sure he would find this to be a rewarding career that would make a difference in the lives of a lot of people. And years later, my friend Randy Fox has done just that. His boundless energy and deep passion for developing leaders has put him on stages around the world. And today, he joins us here on the podcast to talk about his most recent book. It's entitled The Call to Excellence, Influential Leadership for Impactful Results. I look forward to sharing this discussion with you today. Hey, it's another week and another group of leaders from around the world who have joined us for our AI Made Simple course. People have been surprised at how much the tools can provide practical day-to-day value for those who are leading teams and projects. If you haven't yet taken the course, join me. Learn more and join so many other podcast listeners by going to ai.peopleandprojectspodcast.com. Thanks. Let's jump into today's discussion with Randy about his new book, The Call to Excellence. So, Randy, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thanks for having me, Andy. Great to be here.
I've actually never heard your keynote about the Silver Platter Service, but I know that you've talked about it a lot. It's one of your signature stories. I would love to hear the backstory of where that phrase came from and how could it apply to people leading teams and projects?
Yeah, it was an amazing, unexpected experience. And my wife, Marnie, and I were on a flight and we were traveling like all of us do, right? You're just going through your normal experiences. And this flight attendant, Abraham, turned things really on its head. And it was not the normal experience. And he did a variety of different things that really showed that he had a heart to serve people. But what really resonated when it was time to come collect the trash. All the time they walk through the aisles, they got a trash bag, right? I mean, that's what we expect.
Trash.
Put it in the trash bag, right? It's that simple. And here comes Abraham collecting the trash on a silver platter. I mean, literally like this one right here. Mm-hmm. Like he got it on Amazon just like I got mine. He literally comes and collects it. And I was blown away. He didn't service with the platter. He collected the trash with the platter. And I went up to him and I spoke to him about it. And I was like, man, you just seem to love your job. And he's like, no. He's like, I like my job. I love people. And I love seeing that I've made a difference in their day. And literally the very next day, I was delivering a keynote and I just started telling the story. Yeah. And the people responded to it and the movement really kind of began. And it took me a couple of years before I finally wrote the book, Silver Platter Service. But that has become one of the most powerful stories that I've watched teams and leaders use the concept. There's a client of mine that they actually messaged me about 6 months after I was there. And they said that people started buying little silver platters and they were leaving them for people in their cubicles and their offices with little thank you notes for the work that they had done. And they left it on a silver platter and it became, and that's the whole point of it. Yeah. The silver platter isn't about how we collect the trash. It's how we serve someone else and how we lead them through those projects, through those outcomes, through life. And each of us has to find our own silver platter that we can deliver for others. And that really just created a movement. And over the last half a dozen years, I've been working on, well, where do we then go next?
Yeah. And that is all about pursuing excellence, which is your newest book. And I think it's one of those terms that if you say to somebody like, yeah, pursue excellence, we'd all be like, yeah. But sometimes wonder like, well, what does it actually mean? So just as a way to understand it, what does it not mean from your perspective? And then how do you like to explain what it does mean?
Yeah, because at the end of the day, everybody says, oh yeah, excellence, it's being perfect.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I'm like, no. Mm-hmm. It isn't. And we've all known people that are perfectionists. And if we're honest, we all have those traits in us where we're disappointed when we don't get it right. Yet the reality of it is there is no human that's always going to get it right.
Yeah.
And so pursuing perfection to me seems unattainable and anxiety filled because I'm setting myself up for something that I will never permanently be able to sustain. But this idea that I can go after something, I can use my, as I say, our thoughts and our words and our actions when we're pursuing for them to be at their highest and best level. We aren't accepting when we miss, but we aren't beating ourselves up that I have made a mistake. We're learning, we're growing, we're pursuing our highest and best. But it isn't just an outcome, right? Because outcomes are a result of our thoughts. And so how we think drives how we speak, which drives how we act. And so if we want to lead people, if we want to guide people, if we want that project to go well, if we want our family to improve and experience better community and living, it starts in our mind, it walks through our actions, and we're always pursuing the highest and the best level excellence in everything we do. And when we miss the mark, we learn and we go again.
Yeah, I like it. We had a guest on years ago. He said, leadership is maximizing potential in yourself and others. And that came to mind as I was reading your book, because I think highest and best, that could be defined in many different ways, but it kind of forced me to think through, am I getting complacent, or am I trying to maximize my own potential? And if I'm not trying to maximize my own potential, people will kind of pick up on that as well. And are we trying to maximize the potential of the people around us? I don't know. I think this idea of pursuing doesn't mean we never attain it and can never be happy. It just means let's just keep moving forward, right? I mean, let's keep going, even reaching higher, right?
I think there's a difference between surviving our work and our life and thriving. And to me, that's the pursuit. I don't want to just wake up, right? Get the kids off to school, go to work, come home, feed the people, put them to bed, wake up and regurgitate that process. That's just going through life.
Yeah.
But when we pursue excellence, and this is really the thematic word that to me comes through over and over, and it's being intentional. We're being intentional and we're not being complacent.
Right.
And we understand that not all days are the same day. Not every moment is the best moment. But this arch, right? There's this arch in our work and in how we lead others. And it's being intentional, like Abraham was with that silver platter. Like, that's not a happenstance thing.
Yeah,
right? I mean, he's intentional about, and he did so many other things, right?
I'm sure.
And to me, the point is that sometimes really small things can make a really big difference in how we live out excellence, but in also how we influence others in their work and their lives. And really, that's what it's all about. How do we lead people through their work and lead and grow our families by giving them excellence so that in turn, they will pursue it as well.
Yeah, I like it. That's a great way of saying it, Randy. It's hard to imagine that we can move that way without getting feedback from people, because from our own perspective, we're like brilliant and we're pursuing things, right? Our paths are rational to ourselves. And you used a phrase in the book, which I just thought was really interesting: be open to feedback and be unoffendable. And I think be open to feedback, you hear that a lot, but the be unoffendable I thought was interesting. So can you think of a recent example where feedback maybe altered your approach to a project or a leadership challenge?
Well, I'll tell you, this project that we're talking about, the Call to Excellence, the book, I've written many books, but I've never added workbooks and video series and all the other elements that we have surrounded this to create more of a movement so that there's multiple layers that we can go in. And it happened because I was challenged by other people. And people were giving me feedback that there was more to deliver. There's more to be done. And I could have taken the approach saying, I've written 7 books. I know what I'm doing.
Right? Trust me. I'm a professional.
I've been speaking for 10 years. Like, thank you very much.
Right.
But, I think for my years, my 20 years in the corporate world and all those many years as a referee, you do start to learn that if you're not willing to be unoffendable, where you can literally just look at something and say, you know what? Yeah, there's a better idea. Or, yep, that's my bad. I made a mistake. And I'll be honest, for so many years early in my career, I was not that way at all.
Mm-hmm.
I was rewarded for being a power leader. I was given multiple promotions for being a leader that made fast, rash decisions. The people were not what was important. It was the profit, the outcome that was important. And the corporate world rewarded me for that behavior. Yeah. And the reality, though, is that reward doesn't really last because it's not sustainable, because there's people involved, and eventually the bruises and the wounds, or those that have a lot of talent, are not going to stick around for that type of leadership. Yeah. And so I think as people that want to lead and have better results and results that last, relationships that last, we first have to be unoffendable so that we see that there might be a better way, a different thought. Just because we're given some intelligence doesn't mean we have all the intelligence.
That's for sure.
And I think that's what that statement really means, is that we're just humble enough to value others' perspectives, and then we adjust and incorporate the best that we can.
You know, it's interesting. I don't know your wife, Marty. I don't know what her family culture was growing up, but my wife's Sarah's family was, they'd be willing to kind of mix it up over dinner and have vigorous arguments and respectful. But I mean, they would get in it, where my family culture wasn't like that at all. And so it took me a while when we were dating to kind of get used to that difference. But after a while, what you learn is it's okay to disagree. And you even talk about this in the book. It's okay to disagree and yet still be okay relationship wise. And I think this idea of us being able to be unoffendable. So I don't know, I remember which guest it was, but they said 3 magic words: tell me more. And Randy, that has saved my butt so many times. When I want to get offended, be like, tell me more. And what was offensible to me was I was jumping to conclusions about what they meant. And so tell me more is like, oh, okay, so there's a little bit more nuance here than what I maybe think. So is there anything, I mean, being a ref, I'd have to think helped you to get some thicker skin, but is there anything else you try to do when you're starting to feel a little offended, even though you're like,
Oh yeah. And there was a leader, I was a part of a leadership development program many years ago. And I still remember the phrase that he gave, which was put some space between the stimulus and the response.
That's so good.
Because we just want to react.
Yeah.
And many times it's a little bit of a blow up reaction. And certainly, having been a referee for so many years, I say to people all the time, the difference between the good referees and the great elite referees is the same difference between good leaders and the great and elite leaders. And it is simply how they communicate. Because if you're unoffendable, you will hear what somebody says and you will not be defensive. The greatest referees, and I'm not going to say that I was that great, but I tried to incorporate, I learned by failure most of the time. When a coach would say something and I would defend my call, the smart person and version of me should have recognized they already didn't like my call. Why am I defending?
Right.
Because now I'm arguing.
I think I go, oh, thanks for clearing that up, ref.
Yeah, no.
Right.
But and I had some really great mentors that taught me that when you are approached with that, and you just said one example of tell me more, they said when a coach would approach you and they would be upset with the call, instead of defending your call, you ask the coach questions.
That's interesting.
And by asking them, where were you? What was your perspective? That translates to everything. Parenting, leading teams. Yeah. When people are frustrated, help me understand. What's your perspective on this? And now you get some time between the stimulus and the response, but you also hear, I like to say, the art of listening is hearing what the person is not saying. And people always look at me when I'm on stage and they're kind of like, huh? I go, yes, I'll say it again. You need to hear what they're not saying.
Right.
The way that you hear what they're not saying is you ask them more questions. And then they go deeper and you acknowledge them and they go deeper. And suddenly you uncover a space where if you, one, were offended, or two, they just spoke once and you responded. Now going a little bit deeper, we actually get to understand maybe the root cause of the problem. And I think one of the biggest things is that people are too hard on people and they're not hard enough on the issue.
Right.
And we've got to ask the right questions to get to the heart of the issue.
Yeah. My 14-year-old likes to play volleyball, and I love talking to refs. So that's one of the main reasons I love talking to you, Randy, because you spent, nearly 30 years.
Over 30 years.
Over
total,
30 years.
Yeah, 23 at the NCAA level. Yeah.
Right, yeah, exactly. It's amazing. And so I was asking him, I said, so what's one of the most important lessons you've learned as a ref? And he goes, this is what I've learned. I may be wrong, but I'm always right. And I just, I just thought that was funny. And there's an element of which that could be poorly implemented in the business. Like, okay, I'm not ever going to learn from my bad calls or whatever. But I took it as I got to own my calls. And I think, that's probably an example of a lesson you had to learn as a ref, right? Can you think of any other lessons that you found that carry over from your referee days to what you do now?
One of the things that we did as referees is we watched the games. We watched the videos.
Yeah.
So when you watch yourself, the film doesn't lie.
Right.
So how do you as a leader watch yourself? And to me, the best way that you do that, when I was in the corporate world and I was a plant manager, then became a VP of operations, the people that could watch me were the people closest to me, and who we surround ourselves with, and the ability for those people to have the responsibility and the empowerment to speak freely so that we can improve. And I know there's been a lot of conversation about 360 reviews and all these different things. I'm just talking about people that'll walk up and shut the door and say, hey, what you just did wasn't cool, man. Yeah. And we need to talk about it. Like, do you surround yourself with people? I had lunch with a friend of mine the other day, and I'm finding myself being more intentional about reaching out to connect with people that I'm doing life with. Because when I'm doing it on my own, I'm not watching the video, right? I need people beyond just my wife to speak into what's happening. And he said to me, I always would rather do life with 4 quarters than 10 dimes or 100 pennies.
I like it.
And he's like, you want to get better. You can't have 100 pennies, but who are the 4 quarters that you have?
Yeah.
And he always says, show me your 4 people and I'll show you your future, right? And it's so true that I think it just really carries over. We may not always be right in the calls that we make, but we need to make them. And then we have to be honest on whether or not they were the best call. And that's the pursuit of excellence. If we're totally honest and we got it wrong, we've got to own that. And then we've got to find ways to get better. It's the proud, non-humble leader that just says, it's my call, it's my business, it's my team, I'm in charge. And that doesn't work for a long time, as I found out so many times.
Yeah. Yeah, me too, for sure. You talk in your book about the importance of sincerity and truth. And I think that kind of applies to some of this too. Like, am I seeing things truthfully, And my guess is when you talk to people about this, Randy, most people in the audience aren't like, man, I'm really glad you brought this up, Randy, because I have a real honesty problem. Like we see it in other people, but it's more difficult to see in ourselves. So can you think of some ways that we might be actually demonstrating sincerity or truth issues, maybe more than what we realize?
Yeah, that's such a funny point. I'm glad you brought that up because, there'll people walk up to me afterwards and say, I work with this person and da-da-da-da-da-da. And they're just railing on them. And I'm like, I want to be like, hello, I'm talking to you. You're talking to me.
There's a mirror.
Right? It starts with us. I think about what I call the simple slow fade.
Mm.
There are times that we may say, hey, I'm a very trustworthy person. I'm standing on the truth. I've got this bucket. But then I look at people that I know that are really, these are church going, very good people, loving their family well, and the kid's 11 years old and the 10 and under get into the movie for free. So for that night, their kid's 10 years old because who's checking the age? To me, that's a simple, slow fade. Does it have a big impact on anything? No. But I got to admit, today, I messed up on truth. You know what it was?
What's that?
I was driving a little bit over the speed limit. I think literally there are simple, practical things that we do that if we let them into our lives, it starts to erode how we lead. Because we really can't find the line. It's either the truth or it's not. And when the little cracks start to come in, right? I mean, that's what integrity means, right? It's like the hull of a ship. When the cracks come in, eventually the ship sinks. We've got to really guard ourselves in all of those issues, all those angles, how we go to work, what we speak about people. I think often about how there's always workplaces where when something happens, people are talking about a person behind their back. How is that creating a sincere, truthful culture? Right? To me, it's all these little things. I'm going to admit, I've probably done them all. But it's this awareness and this pursuit. Are we willing to get rid of all the little ones so that we're never off the cliff into the really big one? And I think that's where it can really resonate, that everything that we do, how we interact with our spouses, how we lead our kids, how we interact with our team and the clients that we serve, it's the little things that turn into the big things. And I think we all have those if we're honest, and we just have to continue to say, nope, I got to get better there. I can get better there.
I try to think if I say, I'll get back to you on Friday. If I don't get back to you on Friday, it's an honesty issue. In fact, today, I knew you'd be on time for the interview because you take this seriously. But it's not rare for me to have an interview at top of the hour and the guest joins in at 3 minutes after. And, I'm not worried about being inconvenienced to me, but it's one of those things of even little things like that, right?
Yeah.
Is an example of where whether we intend it or not, it could be signaling to the people around us, maybe an issue there.
That's right. I mean, in meetings, right? Meetings, our world is full of meetings. Yeah. Anybody that works with teams, anybody leading projects, there's meetings, whether they're virtual, phone calls, or in person. And one of my biggest things when I, in meetings or even back when I was in the corporate world, do we respect others enough, right? Is there enough sincerity in our heart that the meeting starts when it's supposed to start, it ends when it's supposed to end, we stay on task? They are little things, but that leads right to efficiency, productivity, morale, outcomes. You shift those little things and you start to see bigger shifts in a positive direction.
Yeah. Even this conversation reminds me of really a theme in your book about being brilliant in the basics. So a lot of this is kind of like, it's not new necessarily to us, but it's like we need to be reminded to be brilliant in the basics. And what I thought was interesting is one of yours was kindness, which I can't imagine anyone would ever argue with that. Like, yes, you need to be kind, but it feels to me like sometimes excellence means you have to make the difficult call. Just like as a ref, you actually talk in the book about a really difficult call at the end, near the end of a game you have to make. We have to have hard conversations, which maybe don't feel kind, at least in the moment. So I'm curious on what do you mean by kindness, and maybe what does it not mean?
I believe there's a difference between being kind and nice.
Right.
I don't think they're exactly the same.
Right.
I think when people feel like I've got to have a tough conversation with someone else because of behavior or lack of performance, or they're not on time with what they're responsible for doing, that they're not being nice. No, you're actually being kind to them because you're having a productive, professional conversation. The key is you have to be kind. Our body language, our tone of words, our facial expression, what words we use. This isn't about putting that person down. This is about changing the behavior for the desired outcome. Not having the conversation is not being kind, because you're letting somebody get away, and now you're going to erode your culture. So how we have it is the kindness part, but we have to have it. When a child does something that we know endangers them, as a good parent, we would be kind to sit down. We may even put some new boundaries around their curfew times or whatever it might be. And we can do it in a way that doesn't belittle them, or they don't feel like we still love them. But if we don't have the conversation, or we come into that conversation and say, you are the worst, and we start, yelling at them and putting them down, that's where you've crossed the kindness line. So I think there are a lot of people that feel like having a tough conversation can't be kind, but I think exact opposite. When done correctly, you are being kind, because you're giving that person an opportunity to grow and maximize their potential. And now it's on them, if you've led them correctly, for them to come through with whatever the plan is that you've put in place.
Yeah, that's good, Randy. Another one of the basics is communication, and you're a professional communicator, right? In lots of different ways, but you work with people in all kinds of industries and levels in the organization. Are there a couple things that come to mind? Man, if we just did these things more consistently, we'd be more effective communicators.
Well, I think number one, we need to repeat what is the most important element. I think sometimes people say something one time, or they bury some really important deliverable in a really long email or whatever it is, and then it doesn't get done. And the reality of it is that we have to repeat over and over. We have to follow back up to ensure, but we got to ask questions. That's the second thing. Are we on the same page? Are we clear? Ask clarifying questions to make sure that we're all on the same page together. You just alluded, though, to something that I think is one of the most important elements of communication. Like you said, if I'm going to get back to somebody on Friday, then you get back to them on Friday. If I say that I'm going to get back to you by 4:00 today, one of the things that I learned in the corporate world is sometimes I would say to people, I will get this to you by the end of the day. And then sometimes things would happen that I didn't have it. And so the poor, unexcellent leader just hides and delivers it the next day. The one pursuing excellence would contact that person and say, I'm getting back to you. Here's my status update. I will have it for you in the morning. I apologize, I'm a little delayed. But see, that touch point builds credibility. It builds trust. It builds respect and rapport. Even if what was promised didn't get delivered on time, you had the courage, the strength, the accountability to say, I'm coming back to you by the time I said I would, and here's where I'm at. That's a game changer for people that are dealing with projects and things that need to be moving forward, and lots of people need to be touching it over a period of weeks and months and even years. Those are just simple ways that we become better communicators, when we simply do what we say we're going to do.
It's so good. It's just brilliant with the basics. It's such a good reminder. Yeah. And at some point, I see it myself, if I'm really honest, Randy. I have to be so careful about this, that it's just easy to get complacent. And, you start, I guess in our business, we start reading our own press release, right? We start thinking that, and we'd never say that we know it all, but we start living off of what we know. And sure, there's a couple ideas come in there, but consistency is one of your basics as well. And can you think of some ways that you try to exercise consistency with just not getting complacent, like leveling up your knowledge and skills? So what you know this year, you'll know more next year.
I try to read what somebody else has written every day. Multiple different books. I think there's real value in gaining perspective from others. And that, to me, is one of the ways that I have found very effective, is just hearing other people's expertise, their stories, their knowledge, their insight, that gives me that aha moment of something that I probably already knew, but got complacent and am not doing.
Yeah.
And I think when we go back to like the 4/4 of the people closest to us, yeah, I've got to be able to ask my wife, Marnie, like, where am I at? Right? We have to be comfortable enough in our conversation that she's willing to say to me, hey, you're a little off the rails here. Because you're right. It can be really easy, but I think it can become easy for any successful leader that you feel like, hey, I've got this thing down.
Right.
And yet there's a whole world of people out there that offer. And so I think learning from others in that way, and like I said, I consistently try to read every day something from somebody else.
Yeah.
And that perspective, really helps. I like to look at what other people are doing. Mm-hmm. I'm in this speakers industry, right? Which means it's live speaking, but there's video, and as you know, Zooms, a whole variety of different things. I love going and seeing what other speakers are doing on their LinkedIn and on their websites to learn. What are they saying? What's their content? And how are things working for them? And I was in a mastermind group for several years with 3 other speakers. And once a quarter, we got together. Typically, it was virtually, but it was just to share, just to learn what was working and what wasn't working. And so that we could share ideas and we can learn from each other. I don't view it as we're in competition against one another. We're here to help one another grow, because at the end of the day, they're going to select who they feel is the best fit for their need at that time. Yeah. But if Andy can help me or I can help Andy, I want to have those conversations. Again, it's back to a word that I used at the beginning of our time. It's about being intentional. Yeah. Because if you don't do it, nobody else will. You can just go through life. You can survive, but I want to thrive. And so I have to put some intentional practices, in place. And I'll tell you something else that I do, and I think it's really important, is that there are times, sometimes it's a day, sometimes it's a week or two, where we go on vacation or we go on a date night and I'm not working. I'm refueling. I'm re-energizing. But I run into a lot of leaders and a lot of parents and a lot of people that they are full and they just think that fullness means everything is great. How about getting consistent with giving yourself rest and a break and recharging so you come back a little bit better? I meet people all the time that they're proud that they've banked 10 weeks of vacation. I'm like, I would take 12 weeks if I could, right?
Yeah. That's such a good point. Yeah. And ironically, or interestingly, I feel like sometimes when I have that downtime, all of a sudden really good ideas come to mind that when I was so crowded with other stuff, it didn't get enough visibility, right?
That's right. And actually, a lot of this book I wrote on airplanes, headphones on, hours in the sky, and you're able to just think because the normal world is not interrupting you, and you've got to find consistent ways, intentional ways to invest in yourself so that you don't get complacent, whatever that might be, depending on what the people do or where they are in their season in life.
Yeah, there's so many things I'd love to talk with you about, but let's end with this. We have a lot of parents who listen to the podcast, and I know you mentioned your kids in the book. So can you think of any ways, ideas in your book could help us seek to be better parents?
Yeah, I'll tell you, as I was writing it, I felt convicted as the words hit the, the pages that the greatest sphere of influence that any leader has, if they're a parent, is being a parent and what our kids do. And if we were modeling the types of things that we've talked about today, each and every day, and not just trying to get through life, but wanting them to really see it, want them to like exude it so much that they would want to follow it themselves, that they would be strong enough when they're choosing their friends, that they wouldn't choose people that would take them off the rails of sincerity and truth. That I'm driving kids to practice and I'm hearing 2 kids in the back seat talking about how they saw somebody cheating on a test. And we all grew up with that, right? There's always people cheating on a test. Well, how are we as parents speaking into that? How are we modeling that behavior in our own lives? I think there's so many truths. I've had several people that have responded to the book so far, and they have said that it's really filled with just some timeless leadership truths.
Yeah.
And to your point earlier, it may be not anything that's totally new, but hopefully packaged in a way that is fresh, that tells some funny stories, and then people can see themselves living that out as a parent and realizing that the pursuit of excellence continues on when we're gone if we've instilled it in our kids and our grandkids.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Well, for those listening, this is just a taste of what you experience when you sit through a keynote or read a book served up by my friend, Randy Fox. I want to encourage you to check out the links to his books and his website that I put in the show notes for this cast. So, Randy, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
It's been a pleasure. Been a blast to be with y'all.